You. Well, welcome everyone to creating accessible content for your website. As Jenna mentioned, my name is Michaela Liederman, and I'm the Senior Accessibility and QA Lead at Atten Design Group. I am a certified web accessibility specialist through the International Association of Accessibility Professionals. I have a lot to go over today, so I do apologize if I am talking a little fast, but I hope to get through everything that we're supposed to be talking about today. If you have questions, feel free to either put them in the chat or in the Q&A box as we go, or we can wait until the very end. However, just because of timing, I'm going to hold off on answering any questions until the very end. So let's talk about making your content accessible. Many people think this is all up to the developer. And yes, developers, designers, architects all have a major role in creating accessible websites. But a majority of the errors I see on most sites are actually related to the content. Your content is one of the more important aspects of your site, and it needs to be accessible because, well, people are coming to your site for your content. So we need to make sure that this is available and easy to read. To those that rely on assistive technology, who are blind or visually impaired, colorblind, those with cognitive issues, mobility issues, or auditory impairments. So let's take a look at the 6 important areas to focus on when creating accessible content. We want to make sure we create accessible visuals. We want to know when and how to use a table properly. We want to make sure we produce scannable content. We always want to use semantic markup. We never want to override the site's CSS, and we always want to make sure that we check our work. So let's talk about creating accessible visuals on your site. This could be a simple image or a logo in the content. It could be a focus on more complex images like infographics, charts, and maps, or embedding videos. So let's talk about images first. We want to make sure that we include accurate alternative text. Alternative text provides a text alternative for non-text content. Kind of a mouthful, I know, sorry, but this includes images on websites and applications. It's read by screen readers in place of images, allowing the content and function of the image to be accessible to those with visual or certain cognitive disabilities. It is displayed in place of the image in browsers if the image file is not loaded or when the user has chosen not to view the images to help with load time in general. And it provides a semantic meaning and description to images which can be read by search engines. But as you may see here, I emphasize the word accurate alternative text. And that's because just because you have alternative text, it doesn't mean that it's accurate. And if it's not accurate, it is not accessible. We also want to make sure that we include captions along with images when necessary. I highly recommend this in all instances. Not only does this help emphasize any point you have on the page or the reason that you have the image altogether, but it really just gives a lot more context to what's going on. And just a little reminder that if you are including a caption for your image, then your alternative text in the caption should not say the same thing. Take advantage of this description to really talk about what is going on in the image. So let's jump into a little bit more about accurate alternative text. Well, alt text should convey information that is equivalent to the meaning or purpose of the image within the context of the page. And as you can see here, I've mentioned context of the page, which is emphasizing the point that one image could be found on multiple pages for multiple different reasons, and each one could have a different alternative text depending on why it's there on the page. We also want to make sure that we're staying as succinct as possible. 150 characters or less, about 15 to 20 words max. If it can be shorter, that would be ideal. Now, there is no exact WCAG rule that states it has to be under a certain amount of characters. This is just a general rule of thumb. There are a few reasons for this, but without going into too much detail, is because screen readers, some of them are just going to cut it off and they're not going to keep reading if it's cut past their character limit. And depending on the screen reader device, they may vary. So it could be 120, it could be 150, it could be 170. You don't really know. So just keeping it as succinct as possible definitely helps. And you can't pause in the middle of listening to alternative text and then keep reading from where you pause, similar to you could with normal text throughout your site when you're using a screen reader. However, you could obviously just restart and listen to the whole thing if needed. We want to make sure that we do not include words like image of, graphic of, and so on. Alt text should never include like a .jpeg or .png, .pdf, .svg, and so on in the title. This isn't helpful at all for the user. And always remember that alternative text does not mean you should be filling it with SEO keywords. This will actually be flagged and hurt you on your search now. Having accurate alternative text is weighed higher in Google search results. And if your image is just a bunch of text, then that alternative text should just say exactly what it is in the image. Better yet, don't use an image with the text and just use actual text. This is a funny one that I'm going to include, but I'm including it because I come across it more than you think. Do not use emojis in the alternative text. This isn't helpful at all. What you're seeing as like a person raising their right hand in the emoji is very descriptive. It's like pale skin, yellow, blonde woman raising right hand with smile on its face. It has its own alternative text, which is now just adding even more words for the screen reader to have to listen to. And it's important to remember that all social media posts also have to include alternative text. I'm not going into major detail about social posts today, since I have a whole webinar on that, but there is an area in all social media, LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Pinterest, and so on, that include alternative text and image descriptions. So here's an example. We have a great picture from our summit from a couple years ago. This is the Atten team during a presentation from the Blind Institute of Technology. Jen is going to pull up a poll for all of you, and if you don't mind, let's try and pick what we think is the best alternative text for this image. Is it going to be a group of people listening to a presentation, BIT founder giving a presentation to Atten Design Group, man standing in front of people in an office during a presentation, or Mike Hess, BIT founder, presenting to Atten staff? So I'll just give it another moment and then we will see what the results are. And the results is showing that most people are thinking that it's man standing in front of people in office during a presentation. And honestly, you all did pretty even keel. The bottom two definitely got the most votes, but in reality, let me close the poll out of the way. All of these are technically correct. As I mentioned before, the alternative text should describe the content of the image based on the context of why it's being used. So basically, the alternative text just depends on why it's on the page. What is the reason for it being there? Is it decorative? Does it serve a purpose? What exactly are we emphasizing? For our case, this is being used to talk about the partnership with Atten and BIT, and we were listening to Mike speak internally at Atten, so the alternative text we used in this case was, and just keep in mind this is a recording from a screen reader, so I do apologize if it is a little alarming. So let's play that.
Mike Hess, BIT founder, presenting to Atten staff image. Mike Hess, BIT founder, you are currently on an image.
So this was a recording from VoiceOver on Mac, and you can see we went with Mike Hess, BIT founder, presenting to Atten staff. We kept it nice, short, and simple, and we wanted to make sure that we were conveying the conversation here was a big focus on Mike and BIT with Atten. So we wanted to make sure we included those words in the alternative text to really elaborate on what's going on. And remember, including a more descriptive version of the image is always encouraged if you feel the alternative text does not convey the image's content enough. This is great for visual users, but it's also used to enhance the context of the image for those screen reader users in case we wanted to add a little bit more information or something of that sort. So I have another poll for you. Let's take a look at this one. What about images with text on it? If we're looking at the image, are we going to go with Drupal 9, bolded Drupal 9 text, Drupal 9 with a shadow on a starry background, or a graphic of a Drupal 9 announcement? And this will be another quick one. We'll see what people are thinking. Let's see. Okay, most people are thinking either Drupal 9 or Drupal 9 with a shadow on a starry background. And in this instance, I have Drupal 9 based on why it was being used. It's most likely being used. Obviously, this is an older image that we have here because we're way past Drupal 9. but we're just conveying Drupal 9. It was just a big heading, and this was basically the heading of the page to talk about Drupal 9. However, if this is being used as, let's say, a hero image or a banner image on the page that's used as like a visual decoration, but it's not necessarily decorative, it's just kind of breaking up a lot of text on the content, then I think Drupal 9 with a shadow on a starry background is also a great option for that. So really, it's just whatever you're trying to convey to the user on why it's being there. And what about working with logos? What would the alternative text for this look like? Would it be @, this one doesn't have a poll, don't worry, @design group, @design group logo, @logo, and similar to the other ones, technically they're all correct. I prefer exactly what this is for. So right here, it's @design group, even just would be perfectly fine. But none of these would be bad to encounter and absolutely give enough content of the image that we're looking at. So we know exactly what's happening, but we don't have to go into detail about what the logo looks like. The point of it is that we are just saying what the company name is. Now let's talk about complex images such as infographics, maps, and charts. Now, when I say complex, I'm talking about when alternative text would more likely be more than 10 words or 10 to 15 to 20 words to accurately describe the content of the image. That's a lot of times with infographics, maps, and charts, there's going to be a lot of information that you're looking at that you are gathering, and you want to make sure that you're making it make the most sense. So what do we do if it's more than the 15 to 20 words? Well, alternative text should then describe the point of the complex image. So why are we looking at it? And then maybe just point to a description that has a little bit more elaboration on why it's there on the page. We also want to make sure that we're including image descriptions or captions with all complex images. If you have any graph, any map, any infographic at all on your site, you want to make sure an associated caption is with that image. This can be done a few different ways, but the most common way to do this can be typically in the caption. Sometimes people are like with a text that immediately follows it. Some people might even include a link that goes to a page that elaborates fully on, like, maybe the complex image was a really complex chart or table, then you want to be sure that we're elaborating on that. Or we can describe the image within the text of the page. Like I mentioned here, we can just include a link to the full description so we can get more information there. So let's take a look at an example so that we can understand this a little bit more. I have a map of @design group. It's like of downtown Denver, @design group is highlighted. There's a few different ways we could resolve this. So looking at this, like I mentioned, downtown Denver, @design group, the alternative text could say Denver area map with @design group highlighted as the alternative text. Maybe there's a link following it that says directions to @design group placed right after the image, or maybe the image itself is a link. If we want to just highlight the importance of the page and then include more information after, or maybe this is something that we're describing directions to @design group. So we want to say you want to take a right onto Chestnut and a left onto 38th and a left onto Ringsby. You want to make sure that we're having that somewhere. So we would just say @design group map described in description below, so that a user will understand that, oh, there's a lot more information to this. I need to read that description to understand what's happening, but that alternative text is still conveying some important information. I see something like this pretty often as well. So if we're looking at a pie graph, does anyone have any thoughts on what the alt text for this graph could be? I'd love to see if anyone has the courage to put in what they think in the webinar chat, and we can see if any of us are on the same page. Otherwise, I'll just pretend like you all did, and I'll just keep talking over you anyway. But I'm curious to see if anyone, oh, oh, that's not it. Okay. Dogs 40%, cats 25%, etc. That is a good choice, good answer there. However, pets, hamsters, 15%. So I like that you all are just giving actual directions onto what you're seeing and the percentages of what you're seeing. In this instance, maybe a good example of alternative text would be pie chart showing a majority of people have dogs for pets. I'm not sure it's necessary to start putting in the 40%, 10%, 15%, or so on, because that could get pretty lengthy. However, maybe the context of the image is actually to show that rabbits are making a comeback as a pet. So then in that instance, maybe the alternative text is actually pie chart showing rabbits are growing in popularity or something like that. And then you would have information, maybe a table or some content in the caption that elaborates more on what the percentages are. We'd want to include that detailed description just so we can make sure we're in that same page. So let's talk about videos. I'm not going to go into too much about videos because some of this is not relevant to content creators. You're not going to worry about the blinking and flashing WCAG guideline. You're not going to worry about if it's responsive, developers should do that. You're not going to worry about autoplay. But I think from a content perspective, I think we should be focusing most on making sure that your videos are captioned. YouTube and Vimeo have automated captions, which aren't horrible, but they're still not great. This is definitely a great way to start out, but it's always recommended to get these cleaned up. For instance, I'm not sure if anyone has them enabled right now, but you can be using these Zoom proprietary captions here, which if you are, you may see that it's doing a pretty good job considering this is a live presentation, but I can guarantee that there have been some moments where you may have giggled when it was horribly off, I'm sure. And it may be funny sometimes, but to a user who are relying on these, they need these to be accurate and clean. You also want to make sure you have a downloadable transcript. Transcripts are important for a number of reasons, including the deaf-blind community. But a big one that is relevant to you is that it actually boosts your SEO. It makes portions of your video searchable via text. So for instance, if we were to put this presentation on our YouTube channel, we have the availability to download the transcript that goes with it, and we can associate it with it on YouTube. And now at that point, you can actually just search for, maybe you want to talk about transcripts and you remember me talking about it, but you don't know, oh, I didn't know it was at 20 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes. You didn't know where it was. You could just search for transcript and it will take you to that exact point in the downloadable transcript, which will then bring you to that exact point in the video. So it actually makes your whole video searchable and easy to use for anyone kind of jumping around trying to find that information. You also want to make sure that you're using audio descriptions when necessary. These are different than captions and transcripts, and they're not always super necessary depending on the video. However, sometimes, let's say a recorded science experiment, this will definitely need audio descriptions. So the difference is with a transcript, you're hearing it's writing down everything that I am saying or the user is saying on there. Whatever's audible will be in that transcript. The audio description is going to be describing what is visually happening on the video. So for instance, with a science experiment, let's say a scientist poured in 2 different chemicals into a different beaker, and then it changed colors and then started bubbling and then was overflowing. But if they're not describing that, they wouldn't get that in the transcript. So the audio description will end up just saying all of that, where, okay, scientist is pouring 2 chemicals into 1 beaker. Color is changing from blue to green. It is now bubbling and overflowing. So someone who may not be able to see the video can be getting that same information that is crucial for them. And we want to make sure that we're including a caption or description to go with the video, just similar to complex images. They're always helpful, not only for screen reader users or someone who may be hearing impaired, but just for an everyday user to understand the reason or purpose for showing the video on the page. I'm not sure if anyone has encountered this, but I mean, sometimes if I go to a website and I'm looking for something very specific, maybe I'm trying to solve a dev problem, and I watched this quick video that I thought was associated with it, and then all of a sudden I watched 5 minutes of it and it's not at all what I wanted to watch. And the next video was the one I actually wanted to watch on the page. By including that description of what the video is about will really help make sure that people are looking at exactly what they want to look at. So the next big thing we want to talk about is knowing when to use a table. A table allows you to quickly and easily look up values that indicate some kind of connection between different types of data. So we need to make sure it's only for tabular data only and not being used for structure at all. If you think that you're going in that kind of direction, you definitely want to take a step back. And another one, we definitely don't want to overcomplicate tables. If your table is fairly complicated or there's a table within another table, it is definitely recommended to have a developer implement these correctly with the appropriate accessible labels. We also want to make sure that we're including correct table headers, both structurally and visually. And similar to complex images in the videos, you want to make sure that you're including an associated description or caption. And truth be told, there is no good way to display tables on mobile devices. No matter which direction you go in when you're implementing, someone is going to have a worse experience. For instance, if you just decide to do an overflow scroll, so you can just scroll the table left to right, that's great. However, for screen reader users and for visual users or mobile users, but what happens to someone that doesn't have the mobility impairment and they're just using, for instance, some kind of keyboard attachment? They will not be able to get to a different portion of the table that's hidden because it's not a link, and they're only able to interact with in links and buttons and other interactive elements. Or maybe you do the one where it's stacking, which is also a great way. Now everyone can interact with it. However, if the point of your table is to compare various columns, it can be very difficult to now get that point across for everyday users and those with cognitive impairments. So I have an example here that you're looking at. It's just two tables. They look exactly the same. Visually, they're completely the same. You can't really tell. They have headers on each one, blue headers, white text. There's 3 columns in each. All the text is exactly the same. But in reality, one is created with actual table headers in the code, and one is created with just normal table data cells made to appear like headers. So for instance, someone may just highlight the first row as blue in their editor, and then that's what they call a header. But in reality, that's not going to convey that information to a screen reader user, which is crucial to have in order to navigate a table. Tables, as you can imagine, are very frustrating for a screen reader user because they have to hear table, row 1, column 1, table header, first name, and then they kind of go in and they end up saying all of that words. They say the row, the column, and the table header every time in order for someone to understand how to navigate it. So if you're not including that table header, it's becoming very confusing. It was probably confusing to even explain that, and that's because it's just a confusing experience for screen reader users in general. So how do we do this without any HTML knowledge? Well, if you're using Drupal's, this is the CK editor, your WYSIWYG is what we're calling it, you should be able to do it pretty easily. So you would click on the table icon, which I've highlighted with the red box. It then pulls up this overlay with some more information. So then you can say how many rows you want, how many columns, you can add the headers you need to. There's also options for a caption or a summary for your table, so that's associated there. And all you need to do is in the headers dropdown, you can choose if you want your first row or first column or both. And every time you create a header, it should always have one of those highlighted. It should never have none highlighted. Otherwise, there's no point to actually have that header. So next we want to talk about producing scannable content for all users, visual or not. We want to make sure that they can get to the right content they want. So let's take a look at how we can do this. So headings that describe the topic or purpose of the following content ensures that labels and headings are meaningful when read out of context. For example, when jumping around from heading to heading on the page. So if I haven't mentioned it already, screen readers have the capability of jumping around from header to header. So they can jump around to all heading 2s on the page, all heading 3s. They can also jump around to other elements, all links, all list elements, and so on. It makes it similar to how visually we're looking at a page and we're looking for those visual elements that really stand out. So we're looking for headings. Maybe we're looking for a list that we know that it should be there, or links or something. We want to make sure that they have that ability as well. So making sure it is describing the topic or purpose, and it's describing exactly what we have and it's descriptive. That is super important to make sure we're on the same page. And we want to give users a quick way to scan the page. Obviously, we already know this. It breaks up content. It helps create an easy flow and helps you easily digest and manage chunks of content. So for example, I have this content here. We just have a bunch of text on the left-hand side, couple paragraphs, and it's kind of difficult to scan and find what I'm looking for. So for example, what if I just wanted to learn about the rentals.com and livelovely.com partnership? I'm going to have to scan the paragraphs or read everything just to find what I'm looking for. However, if we use descriptive headings, we're able to easily find the section of content that we want, so we can jump to what is relevant to us. Another very important thing to remember from a content creator perspective is to do not write in all capital letters. Note that what I'm talking about here is in reference to when you write content and you use caps lock and the shift key to write in all caps. I'm not talking about if a designer has created something and developer implemented it to make it appear in all caps. And that's because screen readers announce the phrase letter by letter. So in this instance, it would be read as DON''TWRITEIN, etc., etc. So if you have long bits of content, which I have seen pretty often, maybe an intro paragraph or something, or you're emphasizing like a long heading in all caps and you are holding down caps lock or shift, that is not going to be a good experience. And just take note that it's actually very difficult to read anything more than a couple words at a time in all caps. So even if you are using CSS to transform and make it appear in all caps, I would just reserve that for headings. Don't use that in, or don't have the ability to use that within paragraphs or anything like that. If you need a style added to the WYSIWYG or your editor because you have been writing in all caps with caps lock, but you still want that look without necessarily creating a bad experience, ask your developer to add that into your styles option. And of course, acronyms are the exception since you want these to be read letter by letter. So feel free to keep those with the caps lock on so they are read as intended. We also want to make sure that we are avoiding underlines. These are the universal signs for links. If you're looking to emphasize some content on your page, use bold or italics instead. So let's take a look at why this is important. So I have a bunch of content on this page. I have React and high charts underlined. I bet if I was to ask any one of you to find the link on this page, you're probably going to tell me that underlined text. When in reality, if I bring it out of black and white, Health System Data Center, Drupal 8, React, high charts, those are all actually the links because they're colored in blue. When in reality, you cannot distinguish or convey important information by color alone. And that's because if you have a blue deficiency, for example, for color blindness, they may not be able to see these links at all. Some of you may be able to still see that there's a little blue to them. I'm even hoping that with Zoom's little bit of compression, you might not be able to see that color change at all. So a lot of people may still see React and high charts as the option. So in reality, keep your body links still with the underline. You can still change the color if you want. And if you do want to emphasize any content, just use bold or italics. Next, we want to make sure that we're making link text descriptive. We want to make sure we're avoiding vague links like learn more and click here. And it's important to note that if you have multiple links that say the same thing on one page, it is now considered vague. So for instance, if you're on an event page and you have join the event, that's pretty descriptive and it works really well because there's one join the event button on there and you know what event you're joining because you went to that page. However, if you're on like a list of events and every single event now has join event, join event, join event, join event, well, in reality, that's all a screen reader is going to hear. So now if they're navigating by links only, they're not going to know what event they're joining without having to, okay, I found a join the event link. Let me back up in the screen reader, try to find a heading that is associated with it that makes sense. And you want to make sure that now your heading and the link are associated correctly. And then it just becomes a thing. So we want to make sure we're keeping it descriptive. We also want to make sure we notify the user that a link is external, as well as notifying the user that a link is a PDF or an XML format or a Google Doc or PowerPoint or just any kind of alternative format that is not a normal HTML page. And logos and image links need text too that makes sense. So you can imagine if there is a link on an image, a lot of time you might see that with teaser content where it's an image and a small summary that takes you elsewhere. That image, if it's a link, needs to be the link text. It can't be the alternative text because like 4 boys playing basketball in a backyard doesn't make sense as it makes sense as the alternative text, but doesn't make sense as the link text. So you want to make sure that you are making sure that those all align. So for example, we don't want to do something like to learn more about the history of HTML, click here. Ideally, we want to know exactly where we are going with just the link text. So here is learn about the history of HTML is the direction we would want to go in. Any user can look at this and can easily understand that we are going to learn about the history of HTML. We don't need to search around for the context. We know exactly where we're going. And for instance, I do have the screenshot of the visual aspect from a screen reader. Again, this is VoiceOver on Mac. So here I'm just looking at all the links on this page that I have. And you can see I'm looking, there's a lot of learn more links. So a screen reader user is hearing all of this. They're looking at all the links and all they're hearing is learn more, learn more, learn more, learn more, learn more, so on and so on. And then they have to back up and read following content and surrounding content to know what they're going to learn more about. Or an instance where maybe we're going to download an annual report. It's always important that we want to make sure we include like parenthesis, PDF parenthesis. That way we're at least warning a user that we're going to download a PDF or we're going to look at a PDF option. It could be an XML format, as I said. It could be a Google Sheet. Basically, anything that goes to a non-HTML page should include this parenthesis, whatever the format is, with the ending parenthesis. That way a user is warned about what kind of thing they're going to be interacting with. PDFs just are not accessible. Even if you make them accessible, it's still a whole thing and they probably still aren't accessible. So by warning a user that that's what it is, they at least know that they either need to get help or they're going to have to ask for an alternative format or anything of that sort to be able to interact with it. This also works for external links. A lot of times we may just use an icon that signifies that we're going to a new page. Or if you don't have options for that, by adding in the parenthesis external link is of course always just a good option that you can go with. It makes it a little bit more wordy, but you know that it's extremely more accessible. And as I mentioned, if you have multiple of the same links on a page, it is no longer descriptive. So here is just the Nike site and we have shop, shop, and shop. We don't know what you're shopping unless you go back and then find out if you're shopping for new basics or new backpacks, new must-have kicks, and so on. Next, we want to make sure that we're always using semantic markup. Along with producing scannable content comes the semantic markup. These two go hand in hand. When creating semantic scannable content, not only does this make this scannable for you, who may be a visual user, but we need to make it scannable to those who require the use of a screen reader to properly navigate the site. And I know when you hear semantic markup, you may be thinking, I'm not a developer, I know very little HTML, or you may be thinking, I don't know what semantic markup is, and you've talked about it a whole bunch. Well, let's talk about that first. When I'm talking about semantic markup, I'm talking about WYSIWYG semantics or your editor semantics. So when I'm saying to use correct semantics, I'm talking about using an HTML list when you should use a list. So that overall bulleted list or the 1, 2, 3 list that you have, you're using a block quote element for your quotes. You're not just making it look like a quote. You're not just using quotations and putting in the regular text. You're using a table for tabular data and so on and so on. So whatever you're actually using, and don't make it appear like that. Just click the little button that makes it work. We also want to make sure that we follow the correct heading structure, which I'll go into a little bit more detail. So you want to make sure that heading 2s are always after an H1. H5 and 6 probably isn't used too often. H4s are always found within an H3. H3s are only ever found within an H2. You're not skipping from an H2 to an H4 and so on. And again, I'll explain a little bit more after that. And the most important thing is to remember to not bold paragraphs to make them look like headings. And yes, let me repeat that because it's one of the more important things I want to convey to everyone. Bolded paragraphs should never be used as a heading. A proper heading hierarchy is both visual and programmatic. It's scannable for both visual and screen reader users. Paragraphs are programmatically just paragraphs. They're not headings. You can make them look like a heading by bolding it or changing the color or making it look like something with CSS, but they are not headings. If they were headings, they'd just be a heading. They wouldn't be a paragraph. And it actually hurts your SEO. So you want to make sure that you are never bolding paragraphs. You want to make sure you're using actual headings. So let's jump into the WYSIWYG or the editor semantics and screen readers. I mentioned this before, but screen reader users have the ability to navigate by elements on the page. They can jump from all the navs on the page, all list elements on the page, all images, all links, all headings, get to just an H2, just to an H3, and so on and so on. They can find the H2 they're looking for, look for all the subheadings that are underneath there, find the one they're looking for, and now jump in to another subheading to get exactly the content they're looking for. So this is extremely important to deal with. So how do you do this without any HTML knowledge? Well, if your editor is set up correctly, it should be pretty easy. I have the basic toolbar at the top, and what's highlighted now are the two list elements. If you are going to have a list, instead of doing like a hyphen and writing what you're doing and then pressing enter and another hyphen, just highlight that text and make it a bulleted list or that ordered list. If you're using a block quote or just a quote from anything, so usually I see someone said, can you explain the block quote? I can to a point to say, like, if it's just something taken out of, or like a quote taken from some text that you wanted to highlight, that someone knows that it's a block quote, there's usually an author or a citation associated with it, then you want to make sure you highlight it and put it within this block quote. And then of course, if you want to create a table, you can click the table button. And then when it comes to headings, this is where you would end up using this drop down. You would highlight the text you want. You would choose a heading 2, a 3, a 4, and so on. And I'm not going to go into a deep dive, as I have an entire webinar that dives into just the heading hierarchy alone. But I do want to talk about this quickly. So for instance, I have the bottom section is the visual side of what we see. These are just browser defaults. This has no CSS associated with it. The heading level is automatically larger than the heading 2. Heading 2 is larger than the heading 3, and so on and so on. It gets much smaller. And the top part is the code aspect. So we have the H1 and H2 and H3 and so on. That H1 is super important to convey to a screen reader user that will say heading 1 and then whatever the heading text is, or heading 4, whatever the heading text is within that. So you need to make sure it's following that flow. I also have this is a great way to do this. I think Word does this as well, but these are screenshots from Google Docs. This has the outline bar open on the left. So I have content on the right. I have a heading 3, a heading 4, a heading 5, and a heading 6. It has the default styles of what's going on in the Google sheet that we have set up. In the outline, we can visually see that there is an indentation associated with each heading. So we can see it indents once to an H3, indents twice to an H4, 3 to a 5, and so on and so on. So if we start playing around with how these headings look, so for instance, I now have a heading 6 that looks like a heading 2. I'm not sure why someone would do that, but it happens. Or maybe a heading 5 that looks like a heading 5. And then I have 2 paragraphs that are just bolded to also look like a heading 5. That's great until we go over to the left-hand column and we can see there's a heading 4. Oh, I had that behind my little light camera. Heading 4 looks like a heading 4, and we kind of use that as a lot of times maybe an associated label that goes with it, or you wanted like a smaller heading because you just didn't like the look of it. You can see the indentation doesn't make sense. We go from a heading 2 all the way to a heading 6, back to a heading 5, even though visually the semantics or the visual hierarchy is slightly different. And here's a full view of what we're looking at. This is just from a blog post that I created. And on the left-hand column, we can look at the outline and we can see that the indentation and creates those nice little mountains. You can kind of already see that there are certain headings within other headings, and it all has that correct association. And that's what we're looking for in general. If we have a screenshot from a screen reader user, you can see already that we're conveying certain information. So we have like where it says 3 grants, 3 loans, 2 how to get financial aid. That number is dictating the heading level. So that is what is being conveyed to a screen reader user. So they can look for all the heading 2s, like look for how to get financial aid, and then jump to the one that makes the most sense to them. So it's an easy way to navigate. Next, we want to make sure that we never override the site's CSS. And well, you shouldn't override them for a few different reasons, mostly related to designers and developers. So when it comes to design should have already completed accessibility reviews for all your styles. So if you are adding in new styles and new options, or you're highlighting, you're changing background colors or changing text color, you should be getting that vetted by your accessibility specialist or designer to confirm that it is accessible. You don't want to create any inaccessible styles on the page, like color contrast or a confusing layout. And this could break approved design patterns or consistency. Maybe there was a reason why they're all this color because the color red conveys a little bit more prominence, and that's why we were staying away from that. So when you were adding the red text, it was now kind of taking a hierarchy out of there. And from a development standpoint, developers create patterns that work for all screens and all layouts. So if you're putting in direct widths or something of that sort, and you're playing around too much with that, it may no longer be responsive, because messing with these patterns and rules can override important elements, especially the responsive ones. And one of the first rules of being accessible is to be responsive. So you want to make sure that you're not messing up with that. So I hear this all the time. What if I want to use this H2, but it's way too big, and so that's why I'm using an H4? Well, contact your designer and developer to add another option into your styles dropdown in your editor. Or what if I want to emphasize a whole new section? I want to add something that has a new background color and it's slightly different, bigger text and so on. Don't do it. Contact your designer and developer to add another option into your styles so that it works with your current site. Or insert any excuse that you may have here. I am going to tell you to contact your designer or your developer to add another option into your styles so it works well. And overall, just remember, if you are overriding these styles, then you're probably trying to do this in other areas of your site. It would be easier if the style was an option in your editor so you can use it in other areas and it's completely consistent. And finally, we want to make sure that we're checking our work. We want to leverage certain modules and plugins. One that I always recommend is Editorially. It's a Drupal module as well as a WordPress plugin. It might be others, but I know for a fact that it's both of those. It's important to remember that it's used to supplement, not replace, active testing of your code and design with developer-focused tools and best practices. It automatically checks your content prior to publishing. So when you save whatever you're doing, you'll hit publish. It will take you to a new page that will go through all of its findings. And then from there, you can publish or go and edit. It focuses exclusively on content issues. So very rarely is there going to be something you have to bring back to your developer. It's most likely related to just your content. And it's customizable for those dev heavy users. So for instance, if you use a lot of acronyms, but you don't want to, you're trying to bring it back so everyone can understand it, if you can put something in there so it can flag every time you put that acronym in so that it reminds you that, oh, I need to spell this out correctly for exactly what it is. And it informs you of necessary manual checks. And this is why it's important that it's just used to supplement and not replace active testing. A majority of WCAG guidelines need to be manually reviewed, and no automated tooling can get all of the instances. And it's not always 100%, but it's extremely helpful, and it's going to capture almost all the issues that you may be creating. So I have this quick video going over Editorially and what to expect.
Now let's take a look at Editorially in real life here. So you can see here we're using Ames Community College. They so gratefully let us take a look at it as we've been using this on their site. So you can see here, if we look quickly, you can see we're getting some highlights here. Little question mark there, question mark. Ooh, we got a red outline and little notification there. And as you can see in this bottom right-hand corner, we have this little thing that you can turn on and off. So this is actually the Editorially. So I haven't even saved this. This is in preview mode. So you can see we still have back to content editing. So we're kind of looking at this before we even publish. And you have to go through this step before it actually publishes. So what you can do is you can end up showing the tags. So you can see kind of like where we're at on the page, and see we went from a 1 to a 4 to a 3 to a 2. It kind of gives you that great idea, and then you can skip to some other content there. So let's get rid of that. Then you can see we can get some more information on what we're using this for, kind of skip to each one and minimize what we're working with. But let's see how this is working. So you can see I'm hovering over what's going on here, and it's telling me that my heading jumped from a level 1 to a 4. So really this should probably be a heading level 2, because this is probably a heading level 1. If we scroll down here, we can see another one, a possible heading, because that seems to be just a paragraph that's bolded. This is another one. I mean, this is the same content from before, so you should be able to see that this is the list item of what's going on, and oh man, that should actually be a real list and not just look like one. Then we can see there's an issue within the table header as well. So you can kind of see that this is nice check before before you even publish. And that's why it's nice, because it's not really hidden behind any kind of button. It's done right away.
So as you can see, it's extremely helpful to have that around so that you can double check everything you're working on. So what exactly does editorial test? Well, it has text alternatives, images with no alternative text, images with file names as text, images with very long text, alt text that contains redundant text like image of, photo of, graphic of, and so on. Images with links, with the alternative text is the link name now. We want to make sure that that is fixed so that flags that. It will focus on some meaningful links. So for instance, links with no text. Sometimes you accidentally just put it in there. You don't even know because you can't see it. Links that are just the file name. We want to make sure that that's gone. And vague links like learn more, click here, download. It could also do document and outline structure. So things like skipped or empty heading levels, bolded paragraphs, suspicious formatting that should probably be converted to like a list, for example, like we saw in that video. It could be tables without headers or anything like that. And just general QA, like text written with caps lock on, links to PDFs and other documents. It could be various media embeds and so on. And remember too, that just because it's listed as an error or a warning doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go away if you fix it. So for example, if there's a link to a PDF and you put the parenthesis PDF parenthesis on there, it's still going to flag it because it's still a link to a PDF. It's just now going to kind of warn you to be like, hey, did you fix this? Is your PDF accessible? It's kind of just that last check. And there are plenty of other automated tools out there. So for example, there's wave.webaim.org. Love this for someone who is completely new to accessibility. It's very easy to use and very human readable and easy to use in general. It's accurate and well respected. And you need to ignore other errors and warnings outside of just the content. However, it just does a really great job of explaining everything. So I have a screenshot here of the Walt Disney World website. We see we have 27 errors. We have 4 contrast errors, a bunch of alerts. So you can easily, it shows you exactly where it is. You can click on the icons and it will take you to the code and what's going on. You can click the information button and it will give you more information on why it's an issue and how to resolve it and those types of things. So it's definitely something I recommend if you're looking to check your site for some accessibility pieces. Google Lighthouse is also another really easy one and it's free. If you have Chrome, you have access to it. You just need to right click on your website, go to inspect, and then go to Lighthouse, and then you can do it in there. The score is supposedly weighed on your Google searches, so make sure you're doing well there. And it does more than just accessibility. It does performance, best practice, and SEO. And again, similar to Wave, you do need to ignore other errors and warnings outside of the content. However, it's pretty helpful in general. So I have an example of what it looks like. This is the Disney site. It has an 84% with accessibility. It tells us all the issues it's finding. And it might be too small, but if you can see it at the very bottom, it says additional items to manually check. All the automated tools will still tell you to manually check their things because, as I said, automated tooling can't capture everything. And finally, we want to make sure we review content on desktop, tablet, and mobile. This is especially important if you're using Mercury Editor or Layout Builder or layout paragraphs. Now that you have full control over layouts, you want to check that your layout is properly working on all screens. You're creating content for desktop, but a lot of people are actually going to be looking on their phone. So this is all important for 3 main reasons, because you need to make sure that it's responsive. Your site is responsive in general. If your content isn't responsive, then it does not pass WCAG guidelines. Make sure everything looks as it should and doesn't look broken. Your content should flow in a logical order. Remember, everything we read left to right and up and down. So when you go to mobile and now everything is stacked, does it make sense? Are you still following that logical flow? And finally, be sure to just zoom in on all of your content. You should be able to zoom in up to 200% the normal size and still get your content without any lack of quality. So let's say if you had an image that was text, you're going to lose quality on what that looks like. And you shouldn't have to scroll all around and scroll off the screen in order to get it. And just remember that when creating content, I know sometimes we want to include everything and go a little overboard, but clear and concise and keeping it simple is always the way to go. And just remember that with great power comes great responsibility. And as I said, this is something that is always relevant, but definitely emphasized more with all the amazing work with Mercury Editor and the layout builders and paragraphs. This is great for giving content creators true control over your content, which you didn't always have before. So have fun with your layouts and content, but make sure to keep your things clear and concise, easily readable, follow great content editor rules, and don't forget to check your work. And if you follow all those, you should be creating accessible content in no time. However, if you do find yourself still confused or asking what your next steps are, remember that we're here to help. We believe in giving back to the community, like doing informative webinars like the one I'm doing today, as well as free consultations, which you can sign up for by going to atten.io/accessibility. And I have also included links to some past related webinars. So when we send along the recap, know that you will have access to all of these. You can easily go here. You can also just go to our YouTube channel where you should also be able to find all of these in general.